Is it running interference on the connection? It's more like the phone too, the component.
Very much for your patience. Ready for you.
Hi, this is Javier Olivares with BASSBOSS, and I'm here with David Lee. He is the co-founder, president, and designer of BASSBOSS, and we are at DJ Expo 2023 in Atlantic City. David, what was your vision with the Mark III?
The Mark III, so the Mark II was, not obsolete, and there was nothing wrong with it. But of course, we have a philosophy of always making things better as much as we possibly can, and there were opportunities there. We were looking at the sort of maximum capacity of the processing in certain elements of the product. So I wanted to put in new DSP. That was one of the main things that I needed to update. I wanted to, at that point, make a lot of improvements. And one of the objections that people have about powered speakers is that they are potentially risky to take outside in the weather. So one of the other things that we wanted to do was to improve the sort of the weatherization of them. Now, we didn't make them entirely waterproof, but we made them so that they can go outside and you don't have to worry about it. You can take them out in the field, you can do a show. If it rains, you're not panicking, right? You can, you don't want them to get soggy wet, but at the same time, they're made to be reasonably well isolated from the weather. That's two of the elements. And then amplification, we wanted to make them so that they were universally compatible was one thing. So now, we had folks who needed 120 volts, and then we had folks who preferred 240 volts, and we had different things that we had done because we'd chosen different applications. Now we've unified everything. All the processing is the same on all of the boxes, whether they're subs or tops. All of the communication is the same. All of the amplification and voltage is the same, and all of the power connectors and input connectors are weather isolated, IP65 power connectors and weather isolated input sections, so that if any moisture does get anywhere around the system, it's still isolated from the processing parts and so on and so forth. So it's better for all of those kinds of things. And the other thing about powered speakers that sometimes people think, oh, yeah, powered speakers are toys. We put a tremendous amount of power into these boxes, and they are pro grade. You can, giant festival, touring, all of those, any aspect that you want to do with them, the power's there. These aren't little, plastic toys. These are all birchwood cabinets, and they are, take them anywhere, do anything. They are solid. One of the other things I wanted to do when we did this upgrade, because it's difficult to make an upgrade, so I wanted to incorporate as many things as possible, and that was the ability to upgrade the processing as new technologies became available, as new opportunities, as people came up with things they wanted to do. So we have massively increased the capacity of storage in the DSP memory. We've increased the number of available presets on the DSP itself. We've gone from 48 kilohertz to 96 kilohertz sampling rate. And the actual processing chip is significantly better. It really can do so much more, which gives me more capacity to dial it in to whatever purpose that we find for it. And so every now and again, somebody will come up with something that they want to do, and now we have the ability to, release updates. It'd be like, oh, and so a firmware or a special processing release can go out. People can download it and they can upgrade it. Another thing that comes along with that is the ability to control the cabinets. And we had folks who were, we always said, you don't need a processor between your mixer or controller and your speakers. And you didn't. But when you had somebody else at the mixer and you wanted to have a little bit of oversight of that, you needed something. But there wasn't anything that we could just genuinely recommend for that purpose that was also cost effective. So we built it in. Now you have to, now you can connect the speakers. They each have their own switch, the 2-port switch, and you can link them together. You can connect them to a router, and now you can load presets, adjust levels, group speakers together, whatever it is that you would need to do, turn it down, control the craziness that somebody's doing. All of those things can be done from your laptop on site. And you can also do those updates if and when they get released to be able to make them current with future releases. If we update them for some reason 2-3 years from now, you won't be stuck with the old release. You'll just be able to get the new release. And so those are the kind of, it's just quite a lot there. The Mark III, we didn't redesign the cabinets, but we made them better in every other way that we could possibly make them better.
The Mark III was unveiled at NAMM, and the early feedback, very positive.
Yeah,
people are very excited. Now we're here at DJ Expo, and people have strong reactions for the Mark III. I myself, I noticed that to me there's a big improvement. But sometimes we don't really know what happened or how did we arrive here. So you have new DSP and new amplifier. So what did those two things do to you as far as having tools available to be creative to get to this point? What are those things allow you to do?
More refined equalization is one, because previously there's only so many parametric filters that I could access on either the low frequency or the input side and the low frequency side, high frequency side. And so you had to work within the range of what you had available. Now I have way more. I have just so many more. So I can be more subtle with each change and target each thing more specifically to get a better overall, smoother result. I mean, it's like, I'm not going to say this is a good analogy, but you can't go and do eye surgery with a kitchen knife. You need something a lot more subtle. So in order to get that kind of refinement, you need more smaller changes to get those kind of details dialed in. Another thing is that the amplification itself is better. It's asymmetrical, so we have more power on the low frequency side of the two-way boxes and consequently less power on the high frequency side, but we never needed that much power on the high frequency side anyway. We were literally nowhere near the capacity on the high frequency side of the amplifiers. So although we've lowered the amount of power that's actually available to the tweeters, we're still well being that we actually need for the tweeters. But the good news is that because of that, we've got more power available in the low frequency side, which means we can actually use it. We can actually raise the output of the cabinet because we don't have a limitation on how much we can drive the low frequency side. And so we can actually utilize more of the power that we have the high frequency and utilize more of the output capacity of the driver. So we do have the ability to get louder with the Mark IIIs than we did with the Mark IIs And also within the processing envelope, there are significantly more sophisticated protection systems that are able to be incorporated within that, and multiple layers of that. So most of the time you have, a limiter. In the case of the previous tops, you have a low frequency limiter and a high frequency. We have way more than limiting now. We can do much more refined things with regard to getting closer to the edge. So in the analogies, again, that people might be familiar with, in the early days of traction control in a car, before there was traction control, you get in a wreck, you hit the gas too hard, or anti-lock brakes, you hit the brakes, you skid into something. Then there were the early days, and they worked. They were okay, but they were not exactly smooth, and they weren't exactly comfortable. Now you can pretty well rely on them to manage a lot of things in terms of safety. That's kind of what these limiters are. They get a lot closer to the limits of performance without going over, and without being brutal in terms of how they interfere with the dynamics of the music. So it's a more subtle application in more places, both in the equalization and in the limiting. And that allows other things, different levels of integration that I can create between highs, mids, and lows, that kind of thing. Just having that capacity, that processing capacity that wasn't available previously, it allows you to better integrate the different elements and just have a smooth and dynamic result.
One of the most common questions is, okay, I have Mark II gear. Now I want to buy Mark III. Can I mix them? What are your thoughts about that?
Well, part of what we set out to do, I mean, the Mark II, and even before that, obviously one of the most important things that was part of the system philosophy was to be able to make the different component elements, subs, different subs, tops, be able to be intercompatible. And Mark II was a sort of an evolution of that, in that it still did that. It just did some more stuff as well. Mark III goes beyond that in the sense that you can actually work outside of that envelope if you need to. But that said, all the because the groundwork was done in Mark II, we're not throwing any of that out. So all of the Mark II works with the Mark III. So you can put a Mark II sub next to a Mark III sub, and they will be coherent. You can put a Mark II top with a Mark III sub, a Mark III top with a Mark II sub. Hopefully I'm getting those the right way around. But you get the idea. You can mix them around. There is something of a caution that you need to bear in mind. If you're going to have, now I've seen people do some things that I would suggest not to do, which is to say, just put a stack of like SV9s or something, and they're just not supposed to go like that, or arraying boxes that are not supposed to go together. So that's not going to work no matter what series it is. It's just not the right way to use a given box. But if you've got a box that arrays a DV12, for instance, and you have two Mark II DV12s, and you buy two Mark III DV12s, and you want to array them into a left and right pair, the only thing that we would suggest that you do in that case is to put your Mark IIIs together, put your Mark IIs together, rather than putting them with each other. The differences between them are very slight, but the closer they are to each other, the more those differences are going to be sort of influencing each other. So keep the Mark IIs together, keep the Mark IIIs together, and you'll get the best possible result of blending Mark II tops and Mark III tops. Subs, similarly, you should probably do the same thing. having your Mark IIs on the left, Mark IIIs on the right, whatever. But they're not so far off that you can't put them, like if you have them all in a pile in the middle of the stage or room or whatever, you can do that. They won't be incompatible. So yeah, if you have Mark II anything and you buy Mark III anything, they will work together. That work has not been, discontinued. That whole philosophy still holds together.
As consumers, when we want to compare products, we can go to numbers, right? And we can say, well, I see, for instance, the AT312 went from 3,000 to 4,000 watts, or even the double 18, the ZV28, from 4 to 5. And in our mind, it's easy to say, well, this is an improvement. Then when you look at the DV12, it was 3,000 watts RMS. Now it's a little bit more, but when you hear it, it's noticeably different. It's much better. So is there more to just the numbers? Is there a different way that we need to be thinking in terms of how do we know that we're getting the best value? How do we measure things so that we can develop kind of an eye when we're comparing?
That's a complicated question. There's a lot of parts to that. The numbers tell you a limited story. They tell you a snapshot, right? It's a very small captured moment, element, whatever we want to call it. It's like a photograph, and maybe on December 7th of this or whatever year, there was like 17 inches of snow in Dallas, right? Oh, and so people go, oh yeah, 17 inches of snow in Dallas. That doesn't mean Dallas is cold all the time, far from it. But if you focus on just one element and you don't look at the bigger picture, you could be misled by individual numbers. So in regards to something like the DV12, the overall, the headline number went from 3,000 to 3,200, and that's a small change. In terms of sound pressure level, generally speaking, all things being equal, which they never are, but nevertheless, from a mathematical point of view, in order to double your sound pressure level, which is a 3 dB increase, we'll call it, for the sake of that comparison, for the 3 dB increase, you need to double the power. So you need to go from, if, say, for instance, it's 1,000 watts, you need to go to 2,000 watts to get 3 dB more. And so a 200 watt increase from 3,000 to 3,200 is negligible in terms of sound pressure level if it were just that changing. But in the case of something like the DV12, it's not the only thing that changed. Many other things changed, not least of which being the things we just talked about, the limiting and the processing. But in addition, the amplification changed. So the top line number of 3,200 watts is a little bit more, and that's good because we don't, people would not really love it if we went down. Although, realistically, if it went down and got louder, would that be a bad thing? It would be a bad thing from people who didn't have the opportunity to experience it firsthand and thought that that number was the only thing that they could use to judge one thing against another. But it would be totally not the case. I mean, it wouldn't reduce the value. What we did do, though, is we changed the entire amplification structure. So instead of having two channels that were each 1,500 watts, and they didn't vary much, so one could be pushed to 1,600, and the other one could, basically then, it would then not be able to do the 1,500. It would be reduced because the maximum capacity was 3,000. So realistically, you get 1,600 watts. What we did is we used an asymmetrical amplifier. So now we have a much larger low frequency power output channel running the low frequency, which enabled us to actually increase by almost 1,000 watts. We went from what was 1,500 pushed to 1,600 to 2400 has a pretty significant increase. It's not going to give you, the full 3 dB that would be required by itself, but it's more than, it's a significant amount. I mean, you will notice. It's going to be a noticeable improvement. And then in conjunction with the additional benefits of the limiting and the processing and the stuff that isn't obvious in those kinds of numbers that you can't see, they benefited from that as well. So ultimately, we don't have quite as much power going to the high frequency section that we used to, but we never needed that much power going to the high frequency section in the first place. It was more than it needed to be. So we effectively do have less power going to the tweeter, but what that really means is that we are not using less power. In other words, we still got plenty, but we're just using what we weren't using in the high frequency section, and we are using it in the low frequency section where it was really more necessary. When you go from, again, we're talking all things being equal, as you go from a given frequency down 1 octave, which is to say a halving of the frequency, which is to say a doubling of the wavelength, you essentially need, all things being equal, 4 times more power to achieve the same sound pressure level 1 octave down. So if you go 4 times, 4 times, 4 times, 4 times, 4, you see where that goes. It adds up quickly. I mean, you need a lot more power in the low end. And so that's where you always run out of power. No matter, when it comes to power, and fair enough, high frequency drivers are more sensitive, so they don't need as much power in the first place. And the woofers are less sensitive, so they need more power. You're always going to run out of power on the low end, always. And that's why a lot of times, you need more subwoofers than one. So you don't have a ratio of 1 sub to 1 top, because that lower end just needs more. It needs more displacement. It needs more power. So we didn't need more than we had in the tweeter, and we definitely could use more in the low end. And all those things together give you a pretty significant increase in output from the Mark III compared to the Mark II. Doesn't make the Mark II obsolete, but it does make the Mark III more compelling.
It seems like with every new product that is released and any new version, you seem to do more with less. And especially when we look at other products from other companies, it seems like from a business perspective, you could have taken one of these products and say, well, let's slash the power by half, for example, and still mark it up, and it's still pretty expensive. It would be kind of like average in the industry, where you find a lot of peak power, and it seems like you're getting a lot, but when you actually use the product, there's not much there. You seem to think differently. You seem to do things differently. Why? Why? Is it a perspective in music? Is there something that we're not seeing, that you're doing things with a particular purpose, specifically, that is driving you?
I guess so. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what other people think, what other designers think, what other companies believe in terms of how they make the decisions that they make. My philosophy, my goal is to make things that are not just better, but just create an experience for the audience that they will enjoy and remember. Really, music exists only for the very brief moment that it literally passes over you. Yes, it can be recorded, but nobody enjoys looking at a blank CD or a ROM chip or even a vinyl record. I mean, it's not about that. Yeah, the album art used to be a thing, and there's cool pictures and all that stuff, but it doesn't really exist. You're in the moment when you're in that show, when you're listening to it. Even if you're just sitting at home with your eyes closed, you're in that moment when that music is happening. And beyond that, what have you, what is it for? It really doesn't have so much of a purpose beyond what the person experiencing it is experiencing. And that's where you kind of create that value. And those experiences are moments, and people remember these moments, and they come to these, whether it's a giant festival, or if it's a wedding, or if they're working in the studio, whatever it is, they come to those experiences and they take them with them. If they're good experiences, they take them with them into the future as memories of that experience. So when you go to a show, a big festival or something like that, and there's just some massive moment, and even a song you've heard thousands of times is just that epic in that moment. That's what we're trying to do. That's the moment. That's the memory. That's what you carry forward in life. And to a certain extent, that makes, hopefully, those people's lives better. That, if you think about it, isn't that what the artist is also trying to do? Is trying to create something, some reaction in people. And so being able to translate the artist's vision into this reality that people can experience, and have that connection between the artist and the audience. And it doesn't just mean the artist in terms of the composer or the producer or the guitar player or the singer. It also means the person who's creating the show. Whether they're a DJ, or if they're an MC kind of thing, where you're or a show organizer. You're trying to put all these elements together to get people together to have an experience. And we're there to try to make that experience the best it can be. In the long term, the better that experience is each time, the better the result is for each person or group that's involved in creating that event. And the better that experience is for the audience, the more they're going to love that artist, the more they're going to want to go back to that venue, the more they're going to appreciate that, whether it's a festival brand or whatever it is. These things are cumulative, and they're like, oh, I had this fantastic time. And the next time somebody says, should we go to that? If you think that they will not process that thought and go yes or no based on that experience, you're missing an opportunity. They will go because of how cool it was, how epic it was previous times, and they won't go nearly as readily if they were like, yeah, if you don't get full buy-in, then you have to work so hard to market those people, bring them in. If your sound system is your marketing department, it's working double duty. People come in, they're like, this is nice. And then when they're at home or at whatever it is, and they're talking with their friends, where should we go? Wait, that was nice. It plays together. I mean, these are not just things that we do to, make expensive toys, right? Yes, we can enjoy them as toys, but they can be more than that. They can be engines of creativity. They can be engines of commerce. And they will do all of those things and serve the people who have access to them to that end.
You seem to focus a lot on the experience.
So we're running a little bit low on time. So I want to, if it's okay, to jump to some questions that they're giving us online.
Okay.
Sure.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Going off, talk about musical experiences. David, can you tell us what your most memorable musical experience was?
Your most memorable?
My most memorable musical experience.
Musical experience.
She sells seashells by the seashore. Red lorry, yellow lorry, memorable musical experience. Okay. I can't say that there's one sort of thing that really just blew me away. I guess one of the things was just the this is weird, but honestly, it was repeated disappointment. You know, it was repeated disappointment. I would go to a show, and I would be, that's not what it should be. That should be better. And that's what made me go, no, we gotta do this. This has to be better. I could sit at home and listen to this, and it would be better than this concert. It was just not there. Vast majority of the time, yeah, it didn't have enough low end. So that was a contributing factor to what we wanted to do. But yeah, that was one of the contributing factors. And I used to work in a high-end hi-fi retailer. And I also, at that time, young kid going out to nightclubs, and I was like listening to this high-end hi-fi, going out to nightclubs, and this was the music I wanted to hear, and this was how I wanted to hear it. They didn't make it. And so my goal was to be able to create that hi-fi experience with that quality at the level and intensity that I wanted it to be in that other environment where people were just dancing and intensely having fun.
We have another one. If the DV12 doesn't need much on compression on the compression driver, why not make it 2800 to the low and 600 to the top?
Because we don't have control of everything. So the question is if the DV12 doesn't need that much power in the high frequency, why not change the ratio so that it has even less power in the high and even more in the low? In a perfect world, I would be able to wave a magic wand and make companies bigger than us do my bidding and say, make me one of these. Unfortunately, that world is not the world I live in, so I have to utilize things that are available to me. And those are the ratios that I can actually buy and utilize. Interesting little side note is when the supplier we were doing with the amplifier, they were quite surprised at the small scale of the loudspeaker in comparison to what the power was going into it, because they were saying, well, that's a lot of power for that box. So they actually don't make one that's different. And in effect, that's really the reason why. If I could get them to be exactly what I wanted, and maybe one day I will, but at the moment we deal with what we deal with because that's what we can buy.
We can talk, another question was just asking, what can we do with control bass?
We haven't really determined the extent that different elements of controlled bass will be accessed. So in short, there will be layers of access within control bass. You'll be able to lock it out, and as the owner of the system, when you rent it out or something, you can lock it, and then people can't really do anything if you choose to. The next layer of access will give you the ability to, or grant the ability to, do various things: load presets, adjust levels, group things together, and make changes. The deepest level of access will allow you to make changes within parametric EQs. Potentially, you'll be able to do delay settings and be able to save your presets into some of the blank spaces within the DSP so that you can access them later when you plug your computer in. So if you go somewhere consistently and you find that that's something you want to be able to save, you'll be able to save that. That's at the deepest level of access that you will have. So that covers that. There's a lot more to it. In other words, you can, in all those layers, you can group things together, so you can turn all of your tops up and down together. If you have two different kinds of subs, you can group them together and turn them up and down. You can load presets. You can. It's more than realistically I can cover in these moments, but essentially the other cool thing that you'll be able to do is to do updates and be able to get access to, as we release new versions, you will not be stuck with an old version. You will have access to the new versions when they come out.
David, we have a question here. What are the pros and cons of a subwoofer, a mono stack versus a stereo stack?
How long have we got?
About
2 minutes. 2 minutes and left.
A mono stack of subwoofers means that wherever you are in relation to that mono stack, if you're to the left, to the middle, to the right, you are relatively speaking a similar distance from all of those subwoofers, which means you don't have multiple arrival times, which means they are coherent, which means you get relatively even distribution of sound pressure level from that single point. If you separate them out to a left and a right, when you are equidistant from the left and the right, you will have the same effect as if they were together, assuming you're at the same distance from the combined as the individual ones. But when you move away from that center point, you start to get closer to one, further from the other, and the arrival times influence the phase arrival of, so the different path distances influence the phase of the arrival of the different waves, and they start to cancel. And so that's the difference in a nutshell. You get more consistent pattern, but with the stereo stack, if you're looking for advantages, you haven't got a massive amount of low end in the middle where people are only going to get bass, and you spread it out a little bit. It's never a total cancellation in any given spot, but certain frequencies cancel more as you go off axis, and the pattern changes again as you go further off axis. So it's just a matter of the arrival times that really mess those things up. It's just an unavoidable deal. One of the ways you can fix that is just use like 3. You're never exactly the same. You're never exactly canceling everything because you have a third source. But again, there's downsides to that as well. So can't tell you that there's a dead simple answer to that, but yeah.
We're running out of time. Is there a 15-second what's next for BASSBOSS? Anything? Sneak peek?
We've been burning the midnight oil, I'll say that. Then we've been working very hard to get the Mark III out, and now that it is almost all out, and once we get the software out, the new thing is going to be development of new products. We have a bunch of stuff in the pipeline, and there's a lot of fun things that we're going to be coming out with.
Double 21 maybe?
One of them is double 21, package systems, floor wedge monitor. Further out, a little bit further out, because development time is longer, is a smaller format line array, and so there's a lot.
Exciting stuff.
Even more than I can remember right now. I mean, it's like 12 things at least that are in the process.
I think we're out of time, but thanks for spending some time with us. Thanks, everyone.
Hopefully it was helpful and interesting.